Dad Perfect Revents. 2 days after I signed a check for $80,000 for my son's wedding, the manager of the reception venue called me. His voice was low, almost a whisper. He said, "Mr. Graves, please don't put me on speaker. We went back through the security camera footage from the private dining room last night. You need to come see this yourself. Please come alone, and don't tell your wife anything." My name is Leonard Graves. I'm 67 years old. I built Graves Freight and Transport from one broken down truck and 30 years of mornings that started before the sun came up. I've negotiated with men who wanted to put me out of business. I've weathered recessions, fuel crises, and contracts that fell apart overnight. I thought I had a pretty good read on people. I was wrong about the ones closest to me. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee when Rodney called. Rodney had managed the banquet operations at Clover House for 10 years. Professional, reliable, not the type to get into other people's business. So, when I heard the shake in his voice, something in my stomach dropped straight down. Gloria was in the next room. I could hear her humming to herself while she arranged flowers on the sideboard. White lilies, the same ones she orders every week like clockwork. 38 years I'd woken up next to that woman. 38 years I thought I knew exactly who she was and what she was about. I told her the call was from my insurance broker. Then I grabbed my keys and walked out to my truck. Rodney met me at the side entrance of the venue, away from the parking lot. He looked like he hadn't slept. He walked me back through the kitchen corridor to a small security office, sat me down in front of a monitor, and hit play without saying a word. The timestamp read 11:52 p.m., about 45 minutes after the last guests had cleared out of Darnell's wedding reception. The private dining room was supposed to be empty. The cleanup crew wasn't due until morning. The door opened. Gloria walked in. No limp. She'd been complaining about her knee all week, enough that I'd offered twice to get the car and bring it around front. She walked straight to the bar cart and opened a bottle of champagne, like she'd done it 100 times in that room. Confident, relaxed. A completely different woman than the one who'd squeezed my arm and cried during the toast 2 hours earlier. A minute later, another figure came through the door. Carlton Webb. Carlton had been my company's head accountant for 8 years. I trusted that man with everything. Payroll, contracts, quarterly filings, end-of-year taxes. He sat at my right hand in every financial meeting I'd had for nearly a decade. He called me Leonard. He came to our 4th of July cookout every year. His kids sent me a card last Christmas. He closed the door behind him. Gloria handed him a glass. To the man who never looked up from his invoices long enough to see what was happening right in front of him, she said. They clinked glasses. I sat in that chair and felt something go very quiet inside me. Not panic, not rage, something colder than either of those. The video kept playing. Gloria sat down on the couch and kicked off her heels. Carlton loosened his tie. They talked like two people who had been waiting a long time to finally exhale. Darnell actually cried when Leonard handed them the deed, Gloria said. She shook her head slowly. He handed over a $450,000 house like it was a birthday card. Carlton swirled his glass. Once the business transfers, that's just a line item. We just need Leonard to stay on his feet long enough to sign the paperwork, Gloria said. After that, she paused, took a sip. His heart can do whatever it wants. Rodney reached over and stopped the video. He looked at me. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. I asked him for a copy of the footage. He handed me a flash drive he'd already prepared. I thanked him. I shook his hand. I told him he'd done the right thing and that I wouldn't forget it. Then I walked back out to my truck and sat in the parking lot while the morning traffic started building on the overpass above me. I didn't cry. I didn't hit the steering wheel. I just sat there and let it settle. 38 years. The lilies every week. The hand on my arm at the wedding. His heart can do whatever it wants. I had one question that mattered right now, and it wasn't about Gloria or Carlton. It was about my coffee. The cup that was sitting on the counter every single morning when I came downstairs. The one she made before I was even fully awake. The one I'd never thought twice about drinking. I pulled out of the parking lot and drove north. I didn't go home. I had a stop to make first. Philip Garrett ran a private diagnostics lab that I'd helped keep open 6 years ago when his university grant got cut. He was thorough, discreet, and fast when it mattered. I called him on the way and told him I needed a full blood panel, rush order. He asked no questions. I walked in, rolled up my sleeve, and sat down in the chair. Then I called Adrienne Pace and told her to clear her afternoon. Adrienne Pace had been my corporate attorney for 11 years. She cost me $900 an hour and had never once given me advice I regretted taking. When I walked into her office that afternoon and laid the flash drive on her desk, she watched the footage without a word. When it finished, she closed her laptop, folded her hands, and looked at me. "How do you want to handle this?" she asked. That was the thing about Adrienne. She didn't tell me what to feel. She didn't try to soften it. She just asked the only question that mattered. I told her I wanted it done right. No shortcuts. I wanted every account frozen quietly. No notifications sent to the house address. I wanted a full forensic audit of Carlton's work going back 8 years. And I wanted a trust structure ready to transfer the company the moment we had enough to walk into a courtroom. She started making calls before I was out of my chair. Philip called me at 4:30 that afternoon. He said my warfarin levels were running at 4 times the therapeutic range. I'm not prescribed warfarin. I'm not on any medication that interacts with it. At that concentration, he explained, a minor fall, a sudden spike in blood pressure, even a bad night's sleep could trigger a hemorrhagic stroke. It would look like what happens to a 67-year-old man who worked too hard and didn't take care of himself. It would look like nobody's fault. I sat in my truck in Philip's parking lot for a few minutes after I hung up. I thought about every morning for the past, I didn't know how long, every cup of coffee waiting on the counter, every time Gloria told me to slow down, that the stress was bad for my heart. Every time I thought that was her way of looking out for me. I drove home. I kissed her on the cheek. I told her I was tired. I went to bed early and lay there in the dark, listening to her move around the house below me. The next morning, I came, downstairs. The coffee was on the counter. I thanked her for it. I carried it to the den, set it on the side table, and switched it out for a glass of water when she went to check the mail. I did the same thing the next day, and the day after that. I bought a button camera, the kind that mounts flush with a shirt button, and started wearing it. Day 3, I ran into Carlton at the diner near the office. It wasn't accidental. I knew his schedule better than he thought I did. I told him I'd been feeling worn down since the wedding, that I was thinking seriously about stepping back from the business. I said I was tired of carrying the weight alone. He kept his expression steady, but his eyes moved just a little too fast, the way they do when a man is running numbers in his head while trying to look relaxed. You've earned the rest, Leonard, he said. Let the people around you step up. You don't have to hold everything together by yourself. I nodded slowly. I told him that sounded like the right call. That same week I had lunch with Vivian, Darnell's wife. I kept it casual, told her I was thinking about restructuring the company trust to make sure the family was protected long term. I asked for her thoughts, said I valued her perspective. She was measured at first, careful. But greed has a way of outrunning caution, and within 20 minutes she was telling me that the business should move into a joint family account, one she and Darnell could access when the time was right. She said it like she was doing me a favor, like she was the one looking out for the family. I asked her what she meant by when the time was right. She smiled and said, when you and Gloria are ready to fully let go. The button camera caught every word. 2 days later, Adrienne called me into her office. The forensic accountant she'd brought in had gone through Carlton's records line by line. Over 14 months, Carlton had moved $210,000 out of the company's operating account through 3 separate shell transfers, small amounts, patient, spread across enough entries that a routine quarterly review would never catch it. The kind of work that takes planning. The kind of plan you only make when you're very sure about how things are going to end up. I sat at Adrienne's conference table and looked at the documents spread out in front of me, column after column of dates and amounts and account numbers. 8 years of Monday morning handshakes, 8 years of Christmas bonuses, 8 years of a man sitting inside my business and quietly preparing for the day I wouldn't be there to ask questions. Adrienne asked me if I was ready to move to the next step. I told her I needed 1 more week. She asked why. I told her I had a company anniversary dinner to plan. Graves Freight and Transport had been running for 30 years. I'd been putting off the celebration for months. Too busy, too much going on with the wedding preparations. Now I had a very specific reason to stop putting it off. I wanted the right people in the room. I wanted the right setup. And I wanted every single person who had ever trusted my name to be sitting there when the truth came out. I called the venue, I called the AV company, then I called Bernard Holt. Bernard Holt had been chief of police in our district for 12 years. We'd known each other longer than that, back when he was still in a patrol car and I was still driving my own routes. He was the kind of man who listened to everything before he said anything. When I sat across from him and walked him through the footage, the blood work, the financial records, and the recorded conversation with Vivian, he didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Leonard, what do you need from me?" I told him I needed 4 officers in plain clothes at the anniversary dinner. I needed arrest warrants ready for Gloria and Carlton, and I needed him to trust me on the timing. I would give him a signal, and not before. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded and said he'd be there himself. I spent the next few days getting the dinner ready. 80 guests, business partners, clients, the bank contacts I'd worked with for 20 years, a handful of long-term employees who had been with me since the early days. I told Gloria it was going to be a proper celebration. 30 years was worth marking. She said she agreed completely. She seemed genuinely happy about it, which told me everything I needed to know about how confident she was that things were already going her way. The night before the dinner, I drove out to a lot on the east side of Houston and picked up a 1969 Chevrolet C10. Cherry red, original interior, engine rebuilt, but still sounding exactly the way it was supposed to. I'd wanted that truck since I was 30 years old. Gloria always said it looked cheap, said it didn't fit the image of a man in my position. I'd let that go for 37 years. I paid cash and drove it back to a friend's garage, where it would wait. Until the next night. The day of the dinner, Gloria wore her navy dress. She put her arm through mine as we walked into Clover House and told me she was proud of everything I'd built. I told her that tonight, everyone was going to see exactly what this family was made of. She smiled and said she couldn't wait. We sat down to dinner. I was calm. I ate. I shook hands. I made small talk with people I'd known for decades. Gloria worked the room the way she always did. Gracious, warm, the picture of a woman who had stood beside her husband for 38 years and earned every bit of what that meant. Carlton arrived late and took his seat near the back. He caught my eye across the room and raised his glass slightly. I nodded back. After the main course, I stood up. I thanked everyone for coming. I said 30 years was a long time to be in business, and that a company didn't survive that long on paperwork and contracts alone. It survived on trust, on the people who showed up every day and did what they said they would do. I said tonight I wanted to share something that captured what Graves Freight was really built on. Then I nodded to the AV technician and the lights went down. The first 90 seconds of the presentation were real. Old photographs, the first truck, the first job site, the early crew. People in the room smiled. A few of the long-timers laughed at how young everyone looked. Then the Clover House footage came on. The room went quiet, the way a room goes quiet when something is wrong, but nobody is sure yet what it is. Then Gloria's voice came through the speakers, clear and steady, talking about the $450,000 house like it was an investment vehicle, talking about the business transfer, saying the words his heart can do whatever it wants in a room full of people who had shaken my hand and meant it. I watched the faces around the tables. I watched the confusion become understanding. I watched people who had known Gloria for years go very still. Gloria stood up. Leonard, her voice came out sharp. Turn that off right now. I looked at her across the room. Sit down, Gloria. She didn't sit. She looked around for support. A friendly face. Someone who would step in. Nobody moved. Carlton pushed his chair back. He got about 2 feet before Bernard's officers were on either side of him. I let the footage finish. Then Adrian pulled up the financial records on screen. 14 months of transfers, the shell accounts, the amounts, the dates. $210,000 laid out in plain black and white in front of every person in that room who had ever trusted me with their business. Gloria looked at the screen. Then she looked at me. Not with guilt. Not with regret. With the specific fury of a person who had planned something carefully for a long time and could not believe it had come apart. Bernard stepped forward. His officers moved to Gloria's side of the room. She didn't struggle. She stood very straight, the way she always did when she wanted to look like the most composed person in any room. They walked her out past 80 people who had come to celebrate 30 years of work I had done with my own hands. I watched her go. I didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. The room stayed quiet for a long moment after the doors closed behind her. Then the low murmur started, the sound of 80 people trying to process what they had just watched. I didn't try to fill the silence. I let it sit. Adrienne was already at a side table near the back wall, paperwork laid out in front of her, the formal trust transfer documents, the board structure, everything that needed a signature before the night was over. I walked over, read through each page the way I always do, slowly, every line, and signed where she pointed. Graves Freight and Transport passed into an irrevocable trust managed by 3 people, none of them named Graves. People who had earned it. People who showed up when it wasn't convenient and did the work without being asked twice. That was always the only qualification that mattered to me. I just hadn't applied it close enough to home. When I looked up from the last page, Darnell was standing a few feet away. He'd been waiting. He wasn't sure if he had the right to approach, and that uncertainty was written all over him. Darnell was 34 years old. He had his mother's patience and, I'd always thought, my stubbornness. But stubbornness without direction is just a man standing still. And that's mostly what Darnell had done his whole adult life, waited for things to be handed to him without ever asking whether the hand doing the giving had good intentions. He didn't try to explain himself. He didn't make excuses. He just stood there and looked at me like a man who had finally understood something too late. I put my hand on his shoulder. I told him the house was still his. I wasn't taking that back. I gave it to my son. And whatever else had happened, he was still my son. That didn't change, but the business, the accounts, the rest of it, that was gone. Not as punishment, just as reality. You don't hand the keys to someone who watched the door get broken down and said nothing. He nodded. His jaw was tight. I could see him working to hold himself together in front of the people still left in the room. I told him the only advice I had left to give him was the same advice nobody had given me when I was his age. Start with what you have, not with what you think you're owed. Work until the work means something, and be very careful about who you let stand next to you while you do it. He didn't say much, just nodded again. Then he shook my hand, firm, the way I'd taught him when he was 12 years old, and walked out. I stood there for a minute after he left. The room was mostly cleared out. A few of the long-timers were still at their tables, not sure if they should stay or go. I told them to finish their drinks. They'd earned a slow evening. I went back to the family table to collect my jacket. Gloria's purse was still on her chair. Next to it, sitting on the white tablecloth, was the watch she gave me on our 20th anniversary. A good watch, heavy. The kind that's meant to mean something. I had taken it off earlier in the evening and set it down when I went to check the AV setup. I hadn't put it back on. I looked at it for a moment, then I left it there and picked up my jacket. Outside, the Houston night was warm and thick the way it gets in late spring. The kind of air that reminds you the city is built on flat land and doesn't apologize for it. The parking lot was mostly empty. A few of the last guests nodded to me as they passed. A couple of them shook my hand without saying anything, which was exactly right. Parked under the lights at the far end of the lot was the C10, cherry red, chrome bumper catching the light. Sitting low and steady the way those old trucks do, like they're not in any particular hurry, but they'll outlast everything around them. I'd had it detailed that afternoon. It looked exactly the way I'd pictured it for 37 years. Every time Gloria said it was the wrong image for a man in my position, as if I'd spent 30 years building a freight company to worry about image. I unlocked it and climbed in. The seat was worn leather, soft in the right places. The steering wheel was the original, thick, simple, no screens or sensors or anything that needed a software update. The dash smelled like old vinyl and something faintly like motor oil, which has never once in my life been a smell I minded. I turned the key, the engine came up on the first try, a low, steady rumble that you feel in your chest before you hear it with your ears. I sat there for a moment with my hands on the wheel and let it idle. I thought about the first truck I ever owned, a 1987 Ford with a cracked windshield and a heater that only worked on the driver's side. I drove that thing 14 hours a day for 2 years before I could afford a second one. I ate lunch in the cab more times than I could count. I knew every sound that engine made and what each one meant. I hadn't thought about that truck in a long time. I put the C10 in drive and pulled out of the lot. I didn't have a destination. I had a bag behind the seat with a few days' worth of clothes and Adrian's number saved in my phone. Everything that needed handling was handled. Everything else could wait. I got on the highway heading west and let the city fall away behind me. The road opened up the way it does once you clear the last of the overpasses, and the sky got wide and dark and full of stars that you can't see from inside the city limits. 67 years old, a company I'd given to people who deserved it. A son I'd have to figure out how to love differently going forward. No one in the passenger seat, no one deciding which lane I should be in. Just the road and the engine and the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty. I had worked for 30 years to build something worth leaving behind. Turns out the most important thing I left behind was everything that had been holding me in place. The highway stretched out ahead of me, and for the first time in longer than I could honestly remember, it felt like mine. That was enough. That was more than enough. I spent 38 years thinking loyalty was something you built over time. What I learned is that time just makes a betrayal more expensive. It doesn't make the person more trustworthy. Watch what people do when they think you're not looking. That's the only resume that matters. The hardest thing a man can do isn't starting from nothing. I'd done that at 30, and I knew how. The hardest thing is walking away from something you built with your own hands because the people inside it stopped deserving it. But once you do it, once you actually let go, you find out the weight you'd been carrying wasn't the business, it was the wrong people.